The autumn of 1883 came to Wyoming territory like a thief, stealing what little moisture remained in the red dirt and leaving nothing but dust devils dancing across the barren hills. Clara Bennett stood at her kitchen window, watching the sun sink behind the jagged ridgeline, painting the sky the color of dried blood. Her hands, rough from lye soap and endless labor, gripped the wooden sill as she counted the days until the banknote came due. 6 months since Thomas died. 6 months of whispers following her through the streets of Cedar Ridge whenever she ventured into town for supplies. The good Christian women clutched their shawls tighter when she passed, their eyes sharp with judgment and speculation. "Widow Bennett," they'd murmur, the title dripping with accusation rather than sympathy. Clara turned from the window and surveyed her small kitchen. The cast-iron stove that needed blacking, the table with one wobbly leg, the shelves holding her dwindling stores of flour and beans, everything Thomas left her with, besides debt and a reputation stained by suspicion. She pulled her shawl around her thin shoulders and stepped out to check on the chickens before dark. The coop stood askew, like everything else on the homestead. As she scattered the last handful of grain, watching her dozen hens peck at the hard ground, she heard the familiar sound of hoofbeats approaching from the west. Without looking, she knew who it would be. Jed Hartwell rode up on his bay mare, sitting easy in the saddle despite the pronounced hitch in his left shoulder, a remnant of whatever violence had carved those scars across his weathered face. He touched the brim of his hat, but didn't dismount, knowing better by now than to assume welcome. "Evening, Mrs. Bennett." His voice carried that particular roughness of men who'd breathed too much dust and gunpowder. "Mr. Hartwell." Clara didn't meet his eyes, focusing instead on latching the chicken coop. "I told you before, I don't need help." "I didn't offer any." He shifted in his saddle, leather creaking. "Just passing through. Wanted to mention there's a stranger in town, asking questions." Her hand stilled on the latch. "What kind of questions?" "The kind about your husband, about how he died." Clara forced herself to continue her work, though her fingers trembled slightly. "People always ask questions. Let them talk." Jed's mare stamped, eager to be moving. He held her steady, studying Clara with those gray eyes that seemed to see too much. "This one's different. Says he knew Thomas from before, from Kansas." The blood drained from Clara's face, but she kept her back to him, making a show of checking the coop's wire for holes. Thomas had never mentioned Kansas, but then Thomas had mentioned very little about his life before arriving in Wyoming territory 5 years ago. "I thank you for the warning, Mr. Hartwell. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to finish before dark." He sat there another moment, and she could feel the weight of things unsaid hanging between them like morning fog in the valley. Then, without another word, he turned his mare and headed back toward his own ranch, a 1/4 mile beyond the dry creek bed. Clara waited until the hoofbeats faded before allowing her shoulders to sag. She pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to push back the memories that threatened to surface. Thomas's rages, the bruises hidden beneath long sleeves, the night he'd come home drunk and worse than usual, the night he'd grabbed her throat and she'd wished, prayed even, that he would just disappear. 2 weeks later, they'd found him at the bottom of Widow's Canyon, his neck broken from the fall, or so the sheriff had ruled it, though plenty in town preferred their own theories. Inside the house, Clara went through her evening routine with mechanical precision. She had 3 shirts to mend for Mrs. Morrison in town, 50 cents upon completion. Her needle flew through the fabric as she worked by lamplight, trying not to calculate how many shirts she'd need to mend to make the bank payment. The wind picked up outside, rattling the loose shutter Thomas had never fixed. It carried the scent of rain, unusual for this late in the season. Clara glanced toward the window, seeing the first flicker of lightning far off to the north. A storm coming. Maybe. The land needed it desperately, though she doubted it would arrive in time to save what was left of her kitchen garden. She was finishing the second shirt when she heard it. Voices carrying on the wind from the direction of town. Riders. moving fast along the main road. Clara extinguished her lamp and moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. Torches bobbed like fireflies in the distance, heading east toward the Baxter spread. Her stomach clenched. Torch-bearing riders at night meant trouble, usually the kind that ended with someone hanging from a cottonwood tree. She thought of Jed's warning about the stranger, wondered if the two things were connected. Then she forced herself to turn away. Whatever was happening out there, it wasn't her concern. She had enough troubles of her own. But sleep wouldn't come. Clara lay in her narrow bed, listening to the wind grow stronger, watching the lightning draw closer. She thought about Jed Hartwell, the way he appeared at the edges of her life like a guardian she hadn't asked for, the way he'd fixed her fence posts last month while she was in town, leaving no note, expecting no thanks, the way he looked at her, not with the hungry eyes of men who saw a widow as easy prey, but with something deeper, sadder, recognition, maybe, of one damaged soul seeing another. She'd heard the stories about him, how he had lost his family in an Indian raid, though others said it was soldiers who did it, or Mexican bandits, the story changing with each telling. How he'd ridden with some rough company during the war, done things that sent him west seeking either absolution or oblivion. How he'd bought the old McBride place with gold that no one asked too many questions about, and kept to himself, except for those moments when he appeared at her boundary line like a ghost she couldn't quite banish. Thunder rumbled closer now, and Clara could smell the rain coming, that peculiar scent of dust about to turn to mud. She rose and checked the windows, making sure they were latched tight. As she reached the front room, lightning illuminated the yard in stark relief, and she saw him. A man stood at her gate, just beyond the fence line. Not Jed, this man was smaller, wearing a city coat despite the weather. He stood perfectly still, watching her house, and in the brief moment of electric light, she thought she saw him smile. Then darkness swallowed him again, and when the next flash came, he was gone. Clara's hands shook as she checked the door bolt. Then the rifle hanging above the mantel. It was loaded. She'd made sure of that after Thomas died. She returned to her bedroom but sat on the edge of the bed fully dressed, the rifle across her lap, waiting for dawn or the stranger's return, whichever came first. The storm was coming. She could feel it in her bones, in the electricity that made her hair stand on end. And somewhere out there in the darkness, Jed Hartwell was probably watching too, standing guard over a woman too proud to accept his help, too wounded to trust his intentions. The first drops of rain began to fall, hard and fast, drumming against the roof like impatient fingers. Clara gripped the rifle tighter and waited, wondering if the storm would wash away her troubles or simply reveal what had been buried beneath the surface all along. The morning after the storm's warning came gray and oppressive, with clouds hanging low enough to scrape the hilltops. Clara had managed only fitful sleep, starting awake at every creak of the house. Now, watching weak sunlight filter through her kitchen window. She tried to shake off the unease that clung to her like cobwebs. She needed to check on the chickens. The wind had been fierce during the night, and she worried the coop might have suffered damage, wrapping her shawl tight against the unseasonable chill. Clara stepped outside and immediately noticed the gate hanging open, the gate she was certain she'd latched the night before. Her breath caught. Fresh boot prints marked the muddy ground, leading toward the chicken coop and back. Someone had been here while she slept. Clara's hand instinctively moved to her hip, wishing she'd brought the rifle, before forcing herself to walk forward with measured steps. The chickens seemed unharmed, pecking at the ground in their usual fashion, but her unease only deepened. Why would someone enter her property just to look around? She was examining the prints more closely when a squawk from the far corner of the yard made her turn. One of her hens had wandered toward the vegetable garden, or what remained of it after the drought. Clara hurried after the bird, not wanting to lose even one of her laying hens. The chicken darted between the withered bean poles, leading Clara on a frustrating chase. "Come here, you fool bird," she muttered, lunging forward. Her boot caught on an exposed root, and she went down hard, her ankle twisting beneath her. Pain shot up her leg as she hit the packed earth, dust filling her mouth and nose. "Easy there." The voice came from above her, and Clara looked up to find Jed Hartwell dismounting his horse at the garden's edge. He moved toward her with that particular careful grace of a man accustomed to violence, his gray eyes already assessing her injury. "Don't touch me," Clara said sharply, trying to push herself up. The movement sent another spike of pain through her ankle, and she couldn't suppress a gasp. Jed stopped just out of reach, holding his hands where she could see them. "Can you stand?" Clara tried, managing to get to her knees before the pain forced her back down. Her face burned with humiliation as much as hurt. "I'm fine. Just need a moment. That ankle's swelling already." He gestured toward his horse. "Let me take you back to your house. You can hate me for it later." "I said I don't need—" Thunder rumbled overhead, cutting off her protest. The clouds that had been threatening all morning finally opened, releasing fat drops that quickly became a steady downpour. Clara tried once more to stand, achieving only a limping hop before her leg buckled. She would have fallen again if Jed hadn't moved forward, catching her arm with surprising gentleness. "Just to the house," she said through gritted teeth, hating the necessity of it. "My horse is closer," Jed said, already guiding her that direction. "Storm's getting worse," as if to emphasize his point. Lightning split the sky, followed immediately by a crash of thunder that shook the ground. The rain intensified, turning from drops to sheets in seconds. Clara could barely see her house through the deluge. "The barn!" Jed shouted over the storm, pointing to his nearer structure. "Come on!" With no choice, Clara let him half carry her toward the barn, her injured ankle dragging uselessly. By the time they stumbled through the doors, both were soaked through. Jed's horse followed, seeking shelter on instinct. The barn was warmer than outside, filled with the comforting smells of hay and horseflesh. 3 other horses occupied the stalls, turning to watch the newcomers with mild interest. Jed guided Clara to a pile of feed sacks near the wall, helping her sit before stepping back to a respectful distance. "Thank you," Clara managed, the words bitter on her tongue. She couldn't remember the last time she'd accepted help from anyone, let alone a man. Jed moved to his saddlebags, producing a flask and a relatively clean cloth. "For the pain," he said, offering the flask. Clara shook her head. "I don't drink." "Neither did I, until the war." He set the flask beside her anyway, then knelt to examine her ankle. "Careful not to touch. Needs wrapping? May I?" The question hung between them. Clara knew she should refuse, knew what people would say if they learned she'd been alone with him, but her ankle throbbed, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. "Yes," she whispered. His hands were gentle as he unlaced her boot, more careful than Thomas had ever been even in their early days. Clara found herself studying his face as he worked, the scar that ran from temple to jaw, the lines etched by sun and sorrow, the focused intensity of his gray eyes. "Why do you help me?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Jed's hands stilled for a moment. "Maybe because you're the only person in 50 miles who doesn't look at me like I'm about to rob them." He resumed wrapping her ankle. "Or maybe because I know what it's like to be alone with ghosts." The rain hammered against the barn roof, creating an odd intimacy in their shelter. Clara could hear the horses shifting in their stalls, could smell the wet wool of her dress beginning to steam in the warmer air. "There was someone at my gate last night," she said quietly. "A stranger." Jed's jaw tightened. "I know. Found tracks this morning. He's been asking about you in town. About Thomas. Name's Walter Cunningham. Says he has business to discuss." "I don't know any Cunningham." "No, but Thomas might have." Jed finished wrapping her ankle and moved back. The kind of man who shows up with business rarely brings anything good. Clara pulled her shawl tighter, suddenly cold despite the barn's warmth. "What do you know about my husband?" "Only what everyone knows. He wasn't from here, had money when he arrived, drank too much, and died badly." Jed met her eyes. "And that you're better off without him?" The boldness of the statement should have offended her. Instead, Clara found herself fighting tears. No one had ever said it out loud. This truth everyone could see but wouldn't acknowledge. "I wished him dead," she admitted, the words barely audible above the rain. "Every night he came home drunk. Every time he—" She couldn't finish. "Wishing don't make it so," Jed said quietly. "Trust me on that. I wished a lot of men dead during the war. The ones who actually died, I killed with bullets, not thoughts." Clara looked at him then. Really looked. Saw past the scars and the reputation to the pain that matched her own. "Is that why you came west? To escape what you did?" "Came west to escape what was done," he corrected. "My family. They were traveling to California. I was supposed to be with them, but I stayed behind to finish one last job. Make a little more money." His voice went flat. "Apaches hit the wagon train, or soldiers dressed as Apaches. Never did find out which. By the time I caught up, there wasn't enough left to bury proper." The barn fell silent except for the rain. Clara reached for the flask, took a small sip, and passed it to him. He accepted it with a nod of understanding. "I'm sorry," she said. "So am I. Sorry for them. Sorry for myself. Sorry for every damn thing that's happened since." He took a drink. "But sorry doesn't change nothing. Just have to keep living anyway." A massive thunderclap shook the barn, and Clara involuntarily moved closer to him. He didn't retreat, but didn't advance either, maintaining that careful distance that spoke of hard-learned boundaries. "Storm's not passing anytime soon," he observed. "You're welcome to wait it out here. I'll stay on the other side, keep to myself." But even as he said it, Clara saw him shiver slightly in his wet clothes. She was shivering too, the chill settling into her bones. Their eyes met, acknowledging the foolishness of freezing for propriety's sake. "There are blankets in the tack room," Jed said. "I'll fetch them." He returned with 2 rough wool blankets, handing her one before settling against the opposite wall. The rain continued its assault on the roof, creating a curtain of white noise that seemed to separate them from the world outside. "This Cunningham," Clara said eventually. "What do you think he wants?" "Nothing good. Men like that are usually collecting debts, bounties, or bodies." Jed pulled the blanket around his shoulders. "You should be careful." "I'm always careful." "No," he said softly. "You're always alone. There's a difference." The truth of it stung. Clara pulled her knees to her chest, hugging them despite the protest from her injured ankle. She was alone, had been even before Thomas died. Maybe especially then. "Why aren't you married?" she asked suddenly. "A man with property, steady work." "Same reason you won't remarry," he answered without hesitation. "Some things, once broken, don't trust being whole again." The barn door rattled in its frame, wind and rain trying to force their way in. Clara found herself grateful for the solid walls, for this unexpected sanctuary. She couldn't remember the last time she'd talked to someone, really talked, beyond the pleasantries required for business in town. "I should hate you," she said quietly. "A man alone with me. People will talk. People already talk about both of us." Jed's smile was sharp as his scars. "Let them. Their words can't hurt worse than what we've already survived." Clara considered this, considered him. The careful distance he maintained, the gentleness in his rough hands, the way he offered help without demanding gratitude. So different from Thomas, who had counted every kindness as a debt to be collected. The storm began to ease, rain softening from roar to patter. Soon she would have to leave, return to her empty house and endless worries. But for now, in this barn that smelled of hay and horses and unexpected compassion, Clara allowed herself a moment of peace. "Thank you," she said again, and this time the words came easier. Jed just nodded, understanding that she meant more than thanks for the shelter. Outside, the storm moved on, but neither of them moved to leave just yet. The hours passed like honey dripping from a spoon, slow and golden despite the gray light filtering through the barn's gaps. Clara had shifted position several times, trying to ease the ache in her ankle, but she made no move to leave. Neither did Jed. though he'd risen once to check on the horses and ensure the storm hadn't damaged anything vital. "Tell me about before," Clara said suddenly, surprising herself. "Before the war, before everything went wrong." Jed was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a distance greater than the few feet between them. "Had a farm in Missouri. Nothing grand, just 40 acres along the creek. My wife, Mary. She kept a garden that was the envy of 3 counties. Tomatoes big as your fist. Corn so sweet you'd think it was candy." He paused, lost in memory. 2 boys. Samuel was 7, David 5. They'd follow me around like ducklings, wanting to help with everything. Clara watched his face transform as he spoke. Years falling away to reveal the man he'd been, younger, unscarred, whole. "What happened to them?" she asked gently, though she could guess. "War happened. I joined up. Thought I was protecting them. Mary begged me not to go, said the farm needed me more than the army did, but I was full of righteous fire, convinced I knew best." His laugh was bitter. "Bushwhackers came through while I was gone. Burned the house, the barn, everything. Mary tried to get the boys out, but..." He didn't finish. Didn't need to. "After the war, I couldn't stay. Every creek looked like our creek. Every child's laugh sounded like theirs. So I headed west, kept going until I found land that looked nothing like home." Clara understood that impulse, the need to escape memories that clung like thorns. "Thomas wasn't my first husband," she found herself saying. "I was married before, back in Ohio. James McAllister. He was... everything Thomas wasn't. Kind, patient, worked hard without complaint." "What happened?" "Pneumonia. 3rd winter we were married. I nursed him for 2 weeks, watched him fade like morning mist." She pulled the blanket tighter. "My family said I needed a husband. Couldn't manage alone. Thomas was courting my younger sister. But when James died, he turned his attention to me, said he'd take care of me. But he didn't." "No. He took me away from everything I knew. Brought me out here where I had no one. The drinking started almost immediately. The rest followed." They sat in companionable silence. 2 souls who'd learned that sometimes the people who promise to care for you become the ones you need protection from. "I used to pray," Clara continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Every Sunday in that church, listening to Reverend Mills talk about the sanctity of marriage, about wives submitting to their husbands. I'd pray for strength to endure. Then I started praying for Thomas to change. Eventually," she took a shaky breath, "eventually, I prayed for God to take him away, any way he saw fit. And now you carry guilt for answered prayers." Clara looked at him sharply. "How did you..." "Because I prayed the same thing during the war. Prayed for God to strike down our enemies, make them disappear. Got real specific about it sometimes." Jed's eyes were distant. "Then I'd come across Confederate boys no older than my Samuel, dying in the mud, calling for their mothers. Realized I'd been praying for someone else's sorrow." The rain had nearly stopped now, just occasional drops hitting the roof like afterthoughts. Clara knew she should leave, knew every minute longer increased the risk of discovery, of scandal, but something held her there, perhaps the novel feeling of being understood. "I dream about him sometimes," she admitted. "Thomas, he's at the bottom of that canyon, but his eyes are open, accusing, says I pushed him, though I was home that night. Where was he before he fell? Murphy's saloon, like always, drinking and gambling. Sheriff said he was riding home drunk. Took the canyon trail in the dark like a fool." Clara's voice grew bitter. Nobody questioned it. Thomas riding drunk was as common as sunrise. Jed shifted, his expression thoughtful. "This Cunningham fellow might be worth finding out if Thomas owed him money. Gambling debts follow a man past death sometimes." The thought made Clara's stomach clench. More debts. As if the banknote wasn't enough. "I can barely keep up with what I know about. If there's more, we'll handle it." The word "we" hung between them, unexpected and loaded with implication. Clara felt she should protest, insist on her independence. Instead, She found herself memorizing the way lamplight caught in his gray eyes, the way his hands, so capable of violence, had been nothing but gentle with her. A shiver ran through her, and not from cold. It had been so long since she'd felt anything beyond fear and exhaustion. This warmth blooming in her chest was terrifying in its unfamiliarity. Storms passed, Jed observed, though he made no move to rise. Yes. Your ankle, can you walk? I'll manage. Still, neither moved. The space between them seemed to shrink without either shifting position, as if the very air grew dense with possibility. Clara could hear her heart beating, wondered if he could too. Clara. Her name on his lips was reverent, careful. I need you to know. I don't expect nothing. Won't ask for nothing. Just, if you need help, I'm here. No obligations attached. The kindness of it, the simple respect, broke something inside her. Tears came without warning, silent streams down her cheeks. She turned away, embarrassed, but Jed didn't try to comfort her. He simply sat, bearing witness to her grief without trying to fix it. When the tears finally stopped, Clara felt emptied and strangely clean, like the land after rain. She wiped her face with her shawl, took a steadying breath. I should go. I'll help you to your horse. I didn't bring... She stopped, realizing I'll have to walk, or ride with me. Just to your door, nothing more. The impropriety of it should have decided her immediately. Instead, Clara found herself nodding. What was one more scandal to add to her collection? Jed rose first, moving to prepare his horse. As he worked, Clara watched the efficient movements, the way he murmured to calm the animal. When he returned, he offered his arm with the formality of a gentleman at a dance. The short journey to his horse was awkward with her injured ankle, but Jed supported her weight without comment. At the horse's side, he paused. I'll lift you up, if you permit. Clara nodded, steeling herself for his touch. But when his hands circled her waist, lifting her as if she weighed nothing, all preparation fled. She was aware of every point of contact, every careful placement of his fingers. He set her sideways on the saddle, then swung up behind her with practiced ease. Hold on, he said quietly. And Clara had no choice but to lean back against his chest as the horse moved forward. The ride was torture and comfort combined. She could feel his heartbeat, steady and strong. His arm came around her for balance, and she didn't protest. For these few moments, she allowed herself to imagine a different life, one where this closeness was every day, unremarkable, safe. Too soon, her house came into view. Jed helped her down at the gate, held her steady until she found her balance. Thank you, she said, the words inadequate for everything they needed to convey. He touched his hat brim, started to turn away, then stopped. Clara, be careful. Lock your doors tonight. She watched him ride away, standing at her gate long after he'd disappeared from view. Her ankle throbbed. Her dress was still damp, and she had mending waiting inside, but for the first time in months. Clara didn't feel alone. That night, she did lock her doors. She also loaded the rifle and placed it beside her bed. But when sleep finally came, she dreamed not of Thomas at the canyon's bottom, but of gray eyes and gentle hands, of a barn that smelled like hay and safety, of the word we spoken like a promise. Outside, clouds gathered again, whispering of more storms to come. But for tonight, Clara slept peacefully, her heart carrying something that felt dangerously like hope. Dawn came reluctantly, as if the sun itself was hesitant to illuminate another day in Clara's struggling existence. She rose before first light, her ankles still tender but functional enough for the work that wouldn't wait. The chickens needed feeding, water needed hauling, and those shirts for Mrs. Morrison required finishing if she hoped to collect her 50 cents. She moved through her morning routine with mechanical precision, trying not to think about the previous day's storm, about the shelter of Jed's barn, about the feeling of safety she'd found there. Such thoughts were dangerous luxuries she couldn't afford. By the time she'd finished the outdoor chores and settled at her table with needle and thread, the sun had fully risen, painting long shadows across the dusty yard. Clara was bent over her mending when she heard the approach of a wagon. Through the window, she saw Mrs. Morrison's buggy approaching, which was odd. Clara usually delivered the finished goods to town. Behind the buggy rode two men she didn't recognize, and her stomach tightened with apprehension. Mrs. Morrison descended from the buggy with her usual self-important bustle, but her expression held none of its typical haughtiness. Instead, she looked almost sympathetic. The two men remained mounted, watching. Clara met her at the door, the finished shirts folded over her arm. "Mrs. Morrison, I wasn't expecting you." "No, dear, I imagine not." The older woman's eyes darted to the riders, then back to Clara. "I've come to collect the shirts. Yes, but also—" "Well, there's been talk in town." "There's always talk in town." "Yes, but this is different." "Mrs. Morrison lowered her voice. "That man, Cunningham, he's been making claims. Says your late husband owed him substantial money. Says he has papers to prove it." Clara's grip on the shirts tightened. "Thomas's debts died with him." "Perhaps they should have, but Mr. Cunningham seems to think otherwise. He's been to see Judge Patterson." "Mrs. Morrison glanced again at the riders. "Those men are from the bank. They insisted on accompanying me." One of the riders dismounted and approached, touching his hat brim perfunctorily. "Mrs. Bennett, I'm Charles Donnelly from Cattleman's Bank. I'm afraid there's been a development regarding your loan." Clara's heart sank, but she kept her voice steady. "I have 2 more weeks before the payment's due." "Yes, ma'am, under normal circumstances. However, when additional debts come to light that affect the estate's solvency—" He produced a folded paper from his coat. "This is a notice of acceleration. Given the new claims against your late husband's estate, the bank requires full payment within 7 days." "7 days?" The words hit her like physical blows. "That's impossible. You know it's impossible." "I'm sorry, ma'am. The bank has to protect its interests." He held out the paper, and Clara took it with numb fingers. "If payment isn't received by Friday next, we'll have to proceed with foreclosure." "Mrs. Morrison cleared her throat. "The shirts, dear?" Clara handed them over mechanically, accepting the coins in return, 50 cents. She almost laughed at the bitter irony of it. After they left, Clara stood in her doorway until the dust from their departure settled. 7 days. She had roughly $3 saved, owed 47 on the note. Even if she sold everything, the chickens, her mother's china, Thomas's rifle, she'd never raise enough. She was still standing there when Jed appeared on horseback, riding hard from the direction of town. He dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, and Clara saw something in his expression she'd never seen before. Fear. "You need to pack," he said without preamble. "Now." "What?" "Cunningham's not just a debt collector. I've been asking around, sent some telegrams." Jed's jaw was tight. "He's wanted in Kansas for murder, goes by different names, befriends men in saloons, gets them drunk and gambling, then collects one way or another." Clara's mind struggled to process this. You think Thomas, I think your husband got in deeper than he could handle, and when he couldn't pay, Cunningham helped him have an accident." Jed glanced toward the road. "And now he's coming to collect from the widow." "I have nothing. The bank just—" She held up the foreclosure notice. Jed's expression darkened further. "That's not coincidence. Cunningham probably has an arrangement with someone at the bank, force you out, buy the land cheap at auction." He moved closer. "Clara, you're not safe here alone." "Where would I go?" The question came out more desperate than she intended. "I have no family, no money." "You'll stay at my place." The words hung between them, scandalous in their implication. Clara shook her head. "I can't. People already talk." "Let them talk. Better gossiped about than dead." His gray eyes were fierce. "I've got a spare room. Lockable door. You'll be safer there until we figure this out." That word again, foreign and warming. Clara looked at her small house, at the life she'd scraped together from the ruins of her marriage. It wasn't much, But it was hers. I can't just leave. You can't stay either. Jed's voice gentled. Clara, I know about pride, about standing alone, but sometimes surviving means accepting help. She thought of Cunningham's smile in the lightning flash, of Thomas at the bottom of the canyon, of 7 days ticking away like heartbeats. Just until this is resolved, she said finally. Just until then. He agreed. Clara packed quickly, taking only essentials and what few valuables she possessed. Jed helped her secure the chickens in a crate, promised they'd come back for anything else she needed. As she closed the door to her house, possibly for the last time, Clara felt something shift inside her chest. The ride to Jed's ranch was quiet. Clara perched sideways on her own old mare. Led by Jed, she kept her eyes forward, not wanting to see her home disappearing behind them. Jed's house was larger than she'd expected, built solid from local stone and timber. It spoke of a man who had intended to put down roots, to build something lasting. The spare room was clean and sparse, with a bed, washstand, and, true to his word, a sturdy lock on the door. I'll be just down the hall, Jed said, setting her bag on the bed. Kitchen's through there. Use whatever you need. Jed. She stopped him as he turned to leave. Why are you doing this? He paused in the doorway, not quite meeting her eyes. Because once, a long time ago, I stood by while someone needed help. Told myself it wasn't my business. Wasn't my place. His voice was barely above a whisper. They died because of my inaction. Won't make that mistake again. He left before she could respond, the door closing softly behind him. Clara sat on the unfamiliar bed, in this unfamiliar room, and tried to make sense of how quickly her world had shifted. Yesterday she'd been a widow struggling alone. Today she was, what, under the protection of a man whose reputation was barely better than her own? That evening, they ate a quiet supper of beans and biscuits. Jed had a surprisingly well-stocked kitchen, and Clara found herself wondering about the life he'd imagined when he built this house. Had he hoped to fill it with family again? Or was it just habit, building for ghosts? I'll ride to town tomorrow, Jed said, breaking the silence. See what else I can learn about Cunningham. Maybe talk to the sheriff. Sheriff Watson won't help. He made it clear when Thomas died that I shouldn't expect any favors from the law. Then I'll talk to others. Someone always knows more than they're saying. He paused. You know how to shoot? Thomas's rifle. I can hit what I aim at. Good. There's a Winchester by the door. Loaded. Don't hesitate if you need it. They cleared the dishes together, moving around each other with careful courtesy. When Clara reached for a plate at the same moment, he did. Their hands brushed. Both froze. The touch electric in its simplicity. I should check the horses, Jed said roughly, stepping back. Clara watched him go, her hands still tingling. She finished cleaning up, then retired to her room, turning the lock with mixed feelings. Was she locking danger out, or locking herself in with something equally threatening to her carefully maintained defenses? Sleep came fitfully. Every sound made her start. Wind against windows, horses nickering in the barn, the old house settling. But underneath the fear was something else. The novel feeling of having someone else under the same roof, someone who'd promised protection without demanding payment. Near midnight, she heard Jed moving quietly through the house, checking windows, doors. His footsteps paused outside her room, and she held her breath. But he moved on, and Clara found herself oddly disappointed. She thought about what he'd said, about standing by while someone needed help. Wondered who had died because of his inaction. What guilt he carried besides his family's loss. They were alike in that way, both haunted by deaths they felt responsible for, whether through action or inaction. In the darkness, Clara allowed herself to imagine a different future, one where she wasn't constantly afraid, constantly alone, where we meant something permanent, not just a temporary alliance against danger. It was a dangerous dream, but in the safety of night and locked doors. She let it bloom just a little. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Cunningham, the bank, the inexorable countdown to foreclosure. But tonight, for the first time since Thomas died, Clara fell asleep to the sound of someone else keeping watch. And that, perhaps, was the most dangerous comfort of all. The following days blurred together in a strange domesticity that Clara found both comforting and unsettling. Each morning, Jed rode to town, returning with supplies and fragments of information about Cunningham. In each evening, they shared quiet meals, dancing around the growing tension between them like dancers avoiding each other's feet. On the fourth day, Clara accompanied Jed to town, needing to deliver more mending and purchase thread. She'd argued against it, showing her face while living under his roof would only fuel gossip, but the walls of even Jed's comfortable house had begun to feel like a cage. They took the wagon, Clara sitting as far from him as the bench allowed, maintaining propriety even as whispers followed them down Main Street. At Morrison's Dry Goods, the usual chatter died when Clara entered. Women who normally exchanged pleasantries turned away, their message clear. She had crossed a line from pitied widow to fallen woman, Mrs. Morrison took the mended clothes without meeting Clara's eyes, counting out the coins with unnecessary precision. It was Mrs. Hartley, the minister's wife, who finally broke the silence.
"Clara Bennett,"
she said, her voice carrying the weight of righteous judgment. "I'd heard tales, but I scarce believed them. Living openly with that man, without benefit of marriage or even proper courtship." Clara's cheeks burned, but she kept her voice steady. "Mr. Hartwell has offered me protection during a difficult time. There's nothing improper, Mrs." Hartley's laugh was sharp. "You share his roof, eat at his table. What would your poor husband think?" "My husband is dead," Clara said quietly. "And when he lived, none of you concerned yourselves with what happened under our roof." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Several women shifted uncomfortably, remembering bruises they'd pretended not to see, cries in the night they'd chosen not to hear. "That's different, Mrs." Morrison said weakly. "Thomas was your lawful husband, who put his hands around my throat and squeezed until I saw stars." Clara interrupted, her voice rising. "Who broke my ribs twice and my spirit daily? Where was your Christian concern then?" The shop fell silent. Clara grabbed her coins and thread, turning to leave. At the door, she paused. "Judge me if you must, but I'll take gossip over bruises and scandal over fear. At least Jed Hartwell treats me with kindness." She found Jed waiting by the wagon, his expression telling her he'd heard every word through the thin walls. Without speaking, he helped her up, his hand lingering a moment longer than necessary on hers. They were halfway home when he finally spoke. "I'm sorry, I should have known." "No." Clara stared straight ahead. "They needed to hear it. I needed to say it. Still, your reputation was ruined the day Thomas died. They'd already decided I was a murderess. Adding harlot to the list hardly matters." She laughed bitterly. "At least now they have something real to gossip about." Jed pulled the wagon to a stop beside a small creek, turning to face her. "Clara, you're neither of those things. You're the strongest woman I know, surviving what would break most people. I don't feel strong. I feel—" She searched for words. "Tired. So very tired of being afraid, of being alone, of fighting battles I can't win." "Then stop fighting alone." His voice was urgent. "Let me help carry the load." "Why?" The question erupted from her. "Why do you care what happens to me?" For a long moment, Jed was silent, struggling with words. Then, with careful deliberation, he reached out and took her hand. "Because when I look at you, I see what I thought I'd never see again. Hope, the possibility that maybe all the broken pieces can still make something whole." His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "Because you make me want to be more than just a ghost haunting his own life." Clara's breath caught. The afternoon sun slanted through the cottonwoods, painting everything golden. She could pull her hand away, retreat to safety. Instead, she turned her palm up, interlacing their fingers. "I dream about you," she admitted quietly. Not Not improper dreams, just dreams where I wake up unafraid, where someone cares if I live or die. I care, Jed said simply. More than I should, more than is wise. They sat there, hands clasped, as the creek burbled and birds called overhead. It was Clara who moved first, leaning toward him with a courage she didn't know she possessed. Their lips met softly, tentatively, like two people remembering a language they'd forgotten they knew. The kiss was brief, gentle, but it changed everything. When they pulled apart, Clara saw her own wonder reflected in his eyes. "We should go," she whispered.
Before
"Before we do something we won't regret, but everyone else will make us pay for," he finished. Yes. They continued home in silence. But it was a different silence than before, charged with possibility and promise. At the house, they moved through their evening routine with new awareness, each accidental touch sending sparks through Clara's skin. That night, she sat at her window watching the stars, her lips still feeling the memory of his kiss. She knew the prudent path: lock her door, maintain distance, leave as soon as Cunningham's threat passed. But prudence had brought her nothing but misery. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts.
Clara?
Jed's voice through the door.
I saw your light. Are you well?
She opened the door to find him in just his shirt and trousers, looking as unsettled as she felt. "I couldn't sleep."
Nor I.
He stayed carefully in the hallway. "I need to say, what happened today? I don't want you to think I'm taking advantage.
You're under my protection, and that means...
It means you're the first man to ask nothing of me while giving everything."
Clara interrupted.
"It means you're careful with me in ways my own husband never was."
She stepped closer.
"Jed, I'm not some innocent girl. I know my own mind. And what does your mind tell you? That life is short and often cruel. That happiness is rare and fleeting." She reached up, touching the scar on his cheek. "That I'd rather have one moment of genuine feeling than a lifetime of proper emptiness." He caught her hand, pressing it against his face. "Clara, I know what people will say. I know what it makes me in their eyes." She met his gaze steadily.
"I find I no longer care."
Jed pulled her into his arms then, holding her with a fierce tenderness that made her want to weep. They stood in the doorway, swaying slightly, two damaged souls finding solace in shared warmth. "Stay with me," he whispered into her hair.
Not like that. Just stay. Let me hold you while you sleep.
Let me keep the nightmares away." Clara nodded against his chest. They moved to his room, lying fully clothed atop the covers. Jed's arms around her were safety and comfort and something more. A promise that she wasn't alone anymore, as sleep finally claimed her. Clara thought about the women in town, their shocked faces and harsh judgments. Let them talk. They'd never known the terror of footsteps on the stairs meaning pain was coming. Never felt the relief of gentle hands after years of brutal ones. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Cunningham was still out there, the bank deadline approaching fast. But tonight, wrapped in Jed's protective embrace, Clara allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the broken pieces really could make something whole. In the darkness, she felt him press a kiss to her forehead, heard him murmur words too soft to catch. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Clara Bennett fell asleep unafraid. The peace of dawn was shattered by hoofbeats, too many and too fast for anything good. Clara woke to find Jed already at the window, rifle in hand, his body tense as wound wire. "Stay here," he ordered. But Clara was already reaching for the pistol he'd left on the nightstand. Through the window, she could see them, 6 riders, arranged in a loose semicircle around the front of the house. Cunningham sat his horse in the center, looking freshly barbered and dangerously calm. "Hartwell," his voice carried clearly in the morning air. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Jed stepped onto the porch, rifle cradled casually but ready. "Nothing here belongs to you, Cunningham. Now, that's where you're wrong." Cunningham dismounted with studied ease. "Mrs. Bennett owes me considerable money. Her late husband's debts, you understand? I'm here to collect." Thomas Bennett's debts died with him. Did they? Cunningham produced a paper from his coat. I have a signed note here, witnessed and everything. The widow inherited her husband's assets, such as they are, so she inherits his obligations too. Clara couldn't stand hiding any longer. She stepped onto the porch beside Jed, ignoring his sharp intake of breath. My husband never mentioned any debt to you. Cunningham's smile was cold as winter wind. No, I imagine he didn't. Tom was always optimistic about his luck turning, kept doubling down, trying to win back what he'd lost. His eyes traveled over Clara with an insolence that made her skin crawl. When he couldn't pay with money, we discussed alternative arrangements. Jed shifted, rifle rising slightly. Watch your tongue. No offense meant, just business. Cunningham's men spread out slightly, hands resting on their weapons. Though I'll admit, now I see what Tom was so reluctant to wager. Still, a debt's a debt. How much? Clara asked, though she dreaded the answer. $200, plus interest. The figure was impossible. Designed to be so. Clara felt the trap closing around her. I don't have it. No, but you have land. Sign it over. We'll call it square. That land's already promised to the bank. Jed interjected. Cunningham shrugged. Then the lady better find another way to pay. Tom seemed to think she had talents. The shot came from behind them. One of Cunningham's men had circled around. The bullet splintered wood inches from Clara's head. In the chaos that followed, everything happened at once. Jed shoved Clara inside, firing as he moved. Return fire peppered the doorframe. Clara heard glass breaking, men shouting, horses screaming. She pressed against the wall, pistol shaking in her hands, as Jed exchanged shots with the attackers. The back, Jed shouted. They're coming around the back. Clara ran for the kitchen as boots thundered on the back porch. She fired through the door, heard a curse and stumbling footsteps. The thin wood wouldn't hold long. A window shattered in the front room. Smoke began to curl under the door. They'd set something on fire, probably the porch. Clara's eyes watered as she tried to watch both entrances at once. Clara! Jed's voice, strained. She risked a glance and saw blood on his shirt, his left arm hanging useless. The front door exploded inward. 2 men rushed in, guns raised. Clara fired, catching one in the shoulder. Jed's rifle boomed, dropping the other. But more were coming. The barn? Jed gasped. Go! They stumbled out the back, Jed leaning heavily on Clara. The barn was 20 yards away. It might as well have been 20 miles. Bullets whined past like angry hornets. Halfway there, Jed stumbled. Clara tried to hold him up, but his weight dragged them both down. She looked back to see Cunningham approaching, unhurried, savoring his victory. Should have just paid, he called. Would have been simpler. Clara raised her pistol, but the hammer clicked on an empty chamber. Cunningham smiled, raising his own weapon. The shot that rang out didn't come from Cunningham. He looked down in surprise at the spreading red stain on his vest, then toppled forward, behind him. Sheriff Watson sat on his horse, smoking rifle in hand. A dozen townsmen spread out behind him, weapons trained on Cunningham's remaining men. Drop them, the sheriff barked. Now! Weapons clattered to the ground. Clara looked up in shock as Mrs. Morrison, of all people, rushed forward with bandages. Saw the smoke, the sheriff explained tersely. Figured there was trouble. He glanced at Cunningham's body. Man was wanted in 3 states. Won't be missed. The next hours passed in a blur. Doc Pemberton arrived to tend Jed's wounds, a bullet through the meat of his arm. Painful but not fatal. The fire was extinguished before it could spread beyond the porch. Cunningham's men were arrested, his papers seized. It was banker Donnelly himself who made the revelation that changed everything. Going through Cunningham's belongings, he found not just forged debt papers, but Thomas Bennett's real journal. Your husband was trying to expose Cunningham, he told Clara, handing her the leather-bound book. These are records of rigged games, threatened men, even murders. He was gathering evidence. Clara read Thomas's cramped handwriting with trembling hands. page after page of careful documentation, and near the end, a confession. I fear for Clara. Cunningham knows I'm onto him. If something happens to me, at least she'll be free. It's the one good thing I can do for her. After all the bad. He wasn't riding drunk that night, the sheriff said quietly. He was running. Cunningham caught up with him at the canyon. Clara closed the journal, tears streaming. Thomas had died trying to protect her, trying to atone. It didn't erase the years of pain, but it added a grace note of redemption to their tragic story. About your loan. Donnelly cleared his throat. Given the circumstances, the bank is willing to extend terms. Work out a payment plan you can manage. The crowd began to disperse, but not before several women pressed Clara's hand, murmuring apologies for their judgment. Mrs. Hartley was last, her face creased with shame. "Can you forgive us?" she asked. "We should have helped you long ago." Clara nodded, too exhausted for anger. They all began to leave, but she called out, "Wait, I need witnesses." Everyone turned back, puzzled. Clara walked to where Jed sat on the porch steps, arm in a sling but eyes clear. "Jed Hartwell," she said formally, "you asked me a question the other night about making broken pieces whole." She knelt beside him, uncaring of the audience. "My answer is yes." His good hand came up to cup her face. "Clara, you don't have to, not because of gratitude. Not gratitude," she interrupted. "Love, pure and simple. I love you, Jed. Let them all witness it." He pulled her close, kissing her there in front of God and everyone. When they broke apart, the sheriff was grinning. "Well, I reckon we better fetch Reverend Mills then. Seems we got a wedding to perform." "Mrs." Morrison stepped forward. "Clara Bennett, you can't get married looking like that. Come on, ladies, we've got work to do." As the women bustled Clara away, she looked back at Jed. He was watching her with wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe this was real. She knew the feeling. 2 hours later, in a borrowed dress with wildflowers in her hair, Clara stood beside Jed in his scorched front yard. Half the town had gathered, turning what might have been a quiet ceremony into a celebration of survival and new beginnings. "Do you, Clara Bennett, take this man?" Reverend Mills began. "I do," Clara interrupted, earning chuckles from the crowd. "I absolutely do." Jed's kiss was tender, mindful of their audience but full of promise for private moments to come. As cheers erupted around them, Clara thought about the strange path that had led here, through sorrow and fear, violence and judgment, to this moment of pure joy. "No regrets," Jed whispered as they turned to face their neighbors. "None," Clara whispered back. "We've both been through hell. I figure we've earned our heaven." The sun broke through the clouds then, bathing everything in golden light. And if anyone noticed the smoke damage on the porch or the bloodstains in the dirt, they were kind enough not to mention it. This was the frontier, after all. Happy endings came bullet-scarred but beautiful, just like everything else worth having in the West. The first days of marriage passed in a blur of recovery and revelation. Clara tended Jed's wounded arm with careful hands, changing bandages and forcing him to rest despite his protests. The house bore scars from the attack. Bullet holes in walls, the charred porch, windows boarded where glass had shattered. Yet, somehow, these marks of violence made their sanctuary feel more earned, more real. It was while cleaning out the damaged front room that Clara found them, letters hidden beneath loose floorboards, wrapped in oilcloth. Jed's name was on them, but the return address made her stomach clench. McAllister Ranch, Missouri. "Jed?" She brought them to where he sat at the kitchen table, his good arm wrapped around a cup of coffee. "These were under the floor." His face went pale when he saw the writing. With trembling fingers, he opened the first letter, dated 3 months after his family's death. "Dear Mr. Hartwell," Clara read aloud when he seemed unable to speak. "My name is Sarah McAllister. My husband found your wife and children. We buried them proper, said words over them. I thought you should know they're at rest, marked graves beneath the oak tree by Willow Creek. If you ever come back this way, You'll know where to find them. They didn't suffer long. That's all the comfort I can offer. S. McAllister. Jed's coffee cup shattered on the floor. He stood abruptly, stumbling toward the door, but Clara caught him, pulling him against her as the sobs came. Great, wrenching sounds of grief too long contained. They have graves, he choked out. All this time, I thought there was nothing left of them but ashes and memory. Clara held him as he wept. This strong man who'd survived so much finally allowing himself to truly grieve. When the storm passed, they read the other letters together, updates from Sarah McAllister about the graves, the flowers she placed there each spring, the prayers she said for the unknown family. I need to go back, Jed said quietly. To see them, to thank her. We'll go, Clara corrected. Come spring, when your arm's fully healed and the weather's clear, we'll go together. That afternoon brought another surprise. A wagon rolled up, driven by none other than Judge Patterson himself, with banker Donnelly beside him. Clara and Jed met them on the damaged porch, wary of more trouble. Mrs. Hartwell, the judge began, then smiled at the newness of the name. We've been examining Cunningham's effects more closely. Found some interesting documents. Donnelly produced a leather portfolio. Your late husband, it seems, had an account we weren't aware of. In Denver, he was sending money there regularly. Small amounts, but they added up. Clara frowned. Thomas barely had money for whiskey. What was he sending to Denver? Near as we can figure, he was trying to save enough to send you back east. The judge said gently, the account's in your name. There's enough to cover the loan and then some. Clara stared at the bank book Donnelly handed her. $312. A fortune to someone who'd been counting pennies. He was planning to leave you, Donnelly explained. But he wanted to make sure you'd be provided for first. These letters. He handed over a small bundle. They're to a cousin in Ohio, arranging for you to stay there. Clara sank onto the porch step, overwhelmed. Jed's good hand found her shoulder, steadying her as she read Thomas's awkward attempts at kindness. Cousin Margaret, I'm sending my wife to you. I haven't been good to her. The drink and the anger. I became my father despite every promise otherwise. She deserves better. Please help her start fresh. I'll send money when I can. Thomas. He died before he could tell you, the judge said. Cunningham got to him first. Clara looked up at the men before her, representatives of the same town that had whispered and judged and turned away. Now they brought gifts of truth and reconciliation. Thank you, she managed. Both of you. After they left, Clara and Jed sat together on the scorched steps, processing the day's revelations. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Your first husband loved you too, Jed said quietly, in his broken way. Perhaps, but he let the darkness win. Clara turned to face him. You fought yours. That's the difference. That night, as they lay together in their marriage bed, shy still, careful of his wounds and their own scarred hearts, Clara told him about her memories of Thomas before the drink took hold. The young man who'd brought her wildflowers, who'd promised her adventure in the West. We all start out meaning well, Jed murmured against her hair. It's holding on to that good intention when life gets hard. That's the trick. A week later, the first snow began to fall. Clara stood at the window watching it blanket the ground, covering the scorch marks and bullet holes, making everything clean and new. Behind her, she heard Jed moving carefully, his arm still weak but healing. First snow, he said, joining her at the window. Good for the land. Good for us too, Clara said, like a fresh page. They were interrupted by hoofbeats, a single rider approaching through the falling snow. Clara tensed, but Jed recognized the horse. It's Sam Martinez from the Double Bar. Wonder what brings him out in this weather. Sam was a young vaquero, earnest and hard-working. He dismounted, hat in hand, snow gathering on his shoulders. Mr. Hartwell, ma'am, sorry to bother, but there's been trouble.
That land of yours. Mrs. Clara. Someone's moved onto it. Says they bought it from the bank. Clara's heart sank, despite paying off the loan. She'd been so caught up in recent events that she'd neglected to secure her property properly. Who? Jed's voice was steel. Man named Brewster. Has a legal-looking paper and everything. Sheriff says he can't do nothing without checking the courthouse records. And that won't happen until the snow clears. Clara felt the old despair creeping back. Would they never be free of grasping hands and paper claims? Saddle the horses, Jed said suddenly. Sam, ride to the Morrison place. Tell them we need witnesses. Many as will come. Jed, your arm, Clara began. We'll hold for what needs doing. His eyes blazed with determination. That's your land. Clara, your sweat and tears in that soil. Nobody's taking it. An hour later, they rode through the snow toward Clara's old homestead. Word had spread, and other riders joined them. The sheriff, reluctant but duty-bound. Several townsmen, and, surprisingly, a contingent of women led by Mrs. Morrison. About time we stood up for what's right, she declared, bundled in furs but resolute. They found Brewster, a thin man with calculating eyes, already moving belongings into Clara's house. His own armed men lounged on the porch, hired guns, by the look of them. This is private property, Brewster called out. You're trespassing. This is my property, Clara replied, finding strength in the crowd at her back. Bought with my husband's blood, maintained with my labor. I have a bill of sale. Forged, most likely. The sheriff interrupted. Like too many documents lately. You'll wait for the courthouse check like everyone else. Brewster's men shifted, hands moving to weapons. The crowd behind Clara bristled in response. For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then Mrs. Hartley pushed forward, all 5 feet of her righteous fury. Earl Brewster, I know your mother, helped birth you 30 years ago. She'd be ashamed, seeing you try to steal from a widow. Other women joined her, forming a line of disapproving faces. Shame, they began to chant. Shame on you. It should have been ridiculous. Church ladies against hired guns. But something about their unified voices, their absolute conviction, made the armed men shift uncomfortably. The land stays empty until the law decides, Sheriff Watson declared. Anyone tries to occupy it before then answers to me, and to them. He gestured at the crowd. Brewster's face was dark with rage, but he was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. This isn't over, he snarled, but he signaled his men to mount up. As they rode away, Clara felt tears on her cheeks, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming gratitude. The town that had whispered behind her back now stood beside her. Thank you, she said, voice carrying in the snow-muffled air. All of you. Mrs. Morrison smiled. We've been poor neighbors. Clara, let us be better ones now. The ride home was quiet, snow falling steadily. Jed swayed in his saddle, arm clearly paining him, but his eyes were proud when they met hers. Back at their house, Clara helped him inside, scolding gently about foolish risks. But as she rebandaged his arm, she kissed him softly. My hero, she murmured. Our community. He corrected. That's what saved your land. People finally doing right. That night, as snow piled against the windows and wind sang through the eaves, Clara lay secure in her husband's arms. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Brewster wouldn't give up easily. And there were still repairs to make, life to rebuild. But tonight, she had this, a warm bed, a good man, a town's support, and the promise of spring. Sometimes, Clara thought as sleep claimed her. That's all the happy ending anyone could ask for. Not a perfect life, but a fighting chance at a good one. Spring came late to Wyoming that year, but when it finally arrived, it transformed the land with violent beauty. Wildflowers erupted across the hillsides, streams ran full with snowmelt, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with possibility. Clara stood in what had once been her chicken yard, now expanded into a proper garden, watching green shoots push through the dark soil. The legal battle with Brewster had been settled in their favor. His documents proved as fraudulent as expected.
But more than that victory, the winter months had brought unexpected healing. The town that had once whispered now welcomed. The house that had sheltered violence now rang with laughter. And the man working beside her, shirt sleeves rolled up and hat pushed back, had become not just her protector, but her true partner. "Corn's coming in nice," Jed observed, leaning on his hoe. His arm had healed completely, though he still favored it on cold mornings. "Should have a good crop if the weather holds." Clara smiled, wiping sweat from her brow. "Never thought I'd be happy to see corn growing? Thomas always said farming was beneath him." "Nothing's beneath a man who wants to eat," Jed replied philosophically. "Or a woman, neither." They worked in companionable silence until the sound of an approaching wagon made them look up. It was Doc Pemberton's buggy, but beside him sat an unexpected passenger, a woman Clara had never seen before, dressed in travel-worn but quality clothes. "Mrs. Hartwell." The doctor called out, "This lady's come a long way to find you. Says she's kin to your late husband." The woman descended from the buggy with careful dignity. She was perhaps 40, with Thomas's dark eyes but a kinder cast to her features. "I'm Margaret Sinclair," she said. "Thomas's cousin from Ohio. I received his letters about sending you to me, then heard about his death. I've come to see if you still need sanctuary." Clara felt Jed tense beside her, but she stepped forward with genuine warmth. "Mrs. Sinclair, you've come so far. Please, come inside. You must be exhausted." Over tea and Clara's fresh-baked biscuits, Margaret told her story. The letters from Thomas had troubled her, speaking of his failures and Clara's suffering. When word came of his death and Clara's remarriage, she'd felt compelled to see for herself that her cousin's widow was safe. He wrote that he'd become his father. Margaret said quietly, "I remember Uncle James, a hard man when he drank. Thomas swore he'd never—" She trailed off, then looked directly at Clara. "I'm sorry. We should have done more. When Thomas left Ohio, we were relieved to see him go. We abandoned you both. You couldn't have known," Clara said gently. "And Thomas made his choices." Margaret's eyes moved between Clara and Jed, taking in their easy partnership, the casual touches that spoke of real affection. "But you found happiness now. I can see it, after a fashion," Jed said. "Hard won, but worth the winning." Margaret stayed for 3 days, helping Clara with household tasks and sharing stories of Thomas's youth before anger and whiskey twisted him. On her last evening, she pressed a small leather pouch into Clara's hands. "Thomas sent this with his first letter. Said it was your mother's, that he'd had no right to take it when you married. Inside was a small gold locket, worn smooth with age. He wanted you to have it back." Clara opened the locket to find a miniature portrait of her mother, painted with delicate skill. Tears came then, for all the complexities of love and loss, redemption and regret. "Thank you," she whispered. The next morning, they saw Margaret off at the stage station. She embraced Clara warmly, then surprised Jed with a handshake. "Take care of her," she said simply. "With my life," he replied, and no one doubted he meant it. As the stage disappeared in a cloud of dust, Sheriff Watson approached. "Got something for you, folks. Come by my office when you get a chance." Curious, they followed him to the small building that served as jail and sheriff's office. On his desk lay a worn leather journal and a small canvas bag. "Found these in Cunningham's things. Been going through everything careful-like." The sheriff opened the journal. "Seems your husband wasn't Cunningham's only victim. Man kept records of everyone he'd cheated, or worse. This bag here, gold coins. Figure they belong to his victims' families." "How much?" Clara asked. "Near $300, split between 4 families, including yours." Watson's weathered face creased in what might have been a smile. "Seems even the devil keeps books. Justice has a funny way of working out sometimes." They left the sheriff's office with $75 they hadn't expected, enough to buy good seed, repair the barn properly, maybe even start a small herd. But it was on the way home that the day's biggest surprise awaited. Parked in front of their house was an elegant carriage, out of place as a peacock among chickens. Beside it stood a man in a city suit and a woman Clara recognized with a shock, Mrs. Morrison's sister from Denver, who'd visited once years ago. Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell? The man tipped his hat. I'm James Fletcher, attorney at law. This is Mrs. Lydia Ashford. We're here about an inheritance. Clara's mind raced. I have no family with money. Not your family, ma'am. Mine. Mrs. Ashford stepped forward. My late husband was Samuel Morrison's brother. He passed 6 months ago, left his estate to various relatives, but he also left a peculiar bequest, $1,000 to, and I quote, the bravest woman in Cedar Ridge, who stood up in church and spoke truth when everyone else chose comfortable lies. Clara's knees went weak. Jed's arm came around her waist, steady as always. He was visiting when you confronted the town about their treatment of you. Mrs. Ashford continued. Said it was the most honest thing he'd witnessed in years. He revised his will that very week. $1,000. Clara breathed. It was a fortune, enough to transform their struggling ranch into a prosperous operation. There's one condition, the attorney added. The money must be used to establish something that benefits the community. Education, medical care, something lasting. That evening, as they sat on their repaired porch watching the sunset paint the sky crimson and gold, Clara and Jed discussed the possibilities. A school for the area's children, a fund for women fleeing bad marriages. The choices seemed endless. You know what I want? Clara said finally. A library, books for everyone, children, adults, anyone who wants to learn, and a reading room where women can gather safely, talk freely. The Clara Hartwell Memorial Library? Jed suggested with a smile. I'm not dead yet. She laughed. The Cedar Ridge Free Library. For everyone Thomas's father's anger touched. All the children who might grow up thinking violence is normal. She turned to him. What do you think? I think, Jed said slowly, pulling her close, that you're going to change this town. Already have, truth be told. A week later, they hosted a gathering to announce the library. The entire town seemed to crowd into their yard, ranchers and merchants, proper ladies and working women, even some of the saloon girls who usually kept to the shadows. Clara stood on the porch, Jed beside her, and addressed her neighbors. This library will be for all of us, she said, voice carrying clear. No judgments, no whispered gossip, just books and peace and the chance to imagine different lives than the ones we were handed. Reverend Mills stepped forward. I believe I speak for everyone when I say this town owes you an apology, Mrs. Hartwell, and our gratitude for showing us how to be better. The applause that followed was like spring rain after drought. Clara felt Jed's hand find hers, squeezed gently. She thought of Thomas, drunk and raging, of Cunningham with his ledger of debts, of cold nights alone and desperate prayers. All of it had led here, to this moment of community and hope. Later, after the crowd had dispersed and stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Clara found herself in the barn where she and Jed had first truly talked. So much had changed since that storm drove them together. No regrets? Jed asked, joining her in the doorway. None, Clara said firmly. Every scar brought us here. He pulled her into his arms, and they swayed together in the barn's entrance, dancing to music only they could hear. Above them, the Wyoming stars blazed like promises, and in the distance, a coyote's call reminded them that this was still wild country, where broken things could be made whole and love could grow in the unlikeliest ground. I love you, Clara Hartwell. Jed murmured against her hair, and I love you, Jed Hartwell. She replied, forever and come what may. The night wind carried the scent of growing things, of rain on the horizon, of endless possibility. And in a barn that had once sheltered a frightened woman and a lonely man, two hearts beat as one, writing their own ending to a story that had begun in sorrow but found its way, through blood and tears and courage, to joy. Thank you for listening to this story from the Wild West Campfire. If you enjoyed Clara and Jed's journey, please let us know in the comments where you're listening from. We love connecting with listeners around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more tales of love, redemption, and frontier courage. Share your thoughts about this story below. Until next time, partners, keep riding toward your own sunrise.